will defend him, the black maid who saved a billionaire, after his lawyer abandoned him in court. The courtroom fell silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from respect or anticipation, but the kind that descends when something so unexpected happens that every mind needs a moment to process what they're witnessing. I stood there, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the worn leather handle of my briefcase. The one I'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago when I still thought I'd make it to law school. The fluorescent lights of Courtroom 7B seemed unnaturally bright, illuminating every detail of this moment I'd never imagined I'd experience. "Your Honor," I said again, my voice stronger this time, "I will be representing Mr. Alexander Thornwood in these proceedings." The gallery erupted. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs to gasps, and gasps to outright disbelief. I was 26 years old. I was wearing a borrowed suit that was half a size too large. And until 48 hours ago, I had been cleaning Alexander Thornwood's penthouse apartment for minimum wage plus tips. If you believe courage comes in unexpected forms, comment 1 below and like this video to see how this story unfolds. Judge Margaret Brennan's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, known throughout Manhattan for running the tightest courtroom in the Southern District. "Ms. Jenkins, Your Honor, Maya Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins, are you a licensed attorney in the state of New York?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. This was it, the moment where everything could end before it even began. "No, Your Honor, I am not." More gasps. Someone in the back actually laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound that made my stomach clench. "Then what on earth makes you think you can represent anyone in my courtroom?" Judge Brennan's voice carried the weight of decades of legal authority. I took a deep breath. This was the moment Alexander and I had prepared for. "Your Honor, I invoke Rule 303 of the New York Rules of Professional Conduct, which allows for pro se representation. Mr. Thornwood has chosen to represent himself, and under Section 3 of 116 of the New York Code, Rules and Regulations, he has the right to designate an assistant to aid in his self-representation. I am that assistant, and I will be speaking on his behalf with his explicit authorization." The courtroom went silent again. This was a different silence. The silence of legal minds racing through their mental law books, searching for the hole in my argument. Judge Brennan leaned forward. "That is technically correct. However, Ms. Jenkins, this is not small claims court. This is a $50 million corporate fraud case involving complex financial instruments, corporate governance, and securities law. Are you seriously telling me you're prepared to assist in defending such a case?" Behind me, Alexander Thornwood sat perfectly still in his defendant's chair. The man who'd built a billion-dollar tech empire from a college dorm room now faced complete destruction. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled as always, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers pressed white against the armrest. Across the aisle, opposing counsel, Mitchell Carver from Blackstone and Associates, looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. His $1,000 suit fit him like armor, and his smile suggested he thought this would be the easiest victory of his career. "Your Honor," I said, "I may not have a law degree, but I have spent the last 72 hours doing nothing but studying this case. I know every document, every transaction record, every email. More importantly, I know the truth." "The truth?" Judge Brennan's eyebrow arched. "Ms. Jenkins, the law deals in evidence, not truth. There's often a significant difference." "Then I'm prepared to present that evidence, Your Honor." Mitchell Carver rose to his feet, buttoning his jacket with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, this is absurd. My client, Nexus Capital Management, is accusing Mr. Hugh Thornwood of embezzling $50 million through fraudulent transactions. This is a serious criminal matter. The defense cannot be handled by—" He paused, his lip curling slightly. "By hired help with a Google law degree." The words stung, but I'd known they were coming. In the 3 years I'd worked as Alexander's maid, I'd learned to recognize casual cruelty dressed up as sophistication. "That's enough, Mr. Carver," Judge Brennan said sharply. Then she turned back to me. "Ms. Jenkins, I'm going to allow this arrangement to proceed. However, understand that I will be watching extremely closely. The first sign that Mr. Thornwood's rights are being compromised by inadequate representation, and I will appoint counsel myself. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Your Honor. Very well. Mr. Carver, please proceed with your opening statement. As I sat down next to Alexander, he leaned close and whispered, "Thank you, Maya. I know what you're risking." I nodded but didn't respond. He had no idea what I was really risking. No one did. Let me take you back to where this impossible situation really began. My name is Maya Jenkins, and I grew up in a two-bedroom apartment in the Bronx with my mother, my grandmother, and my two younger brothers. My mother cleaned offices downtown. My grandmother cleaned houses in Westchester. I grew up understanding that hard work was currency, but also that some doors remained permanently closed no matter how hard you knocked. I was supposed to be different. I was the smart one, the one with straight A's, the one who got a full scholarship to Columbia. Pre-law. I was going to be the first lawyer in my family, the one who would use the system to help people who looked like us, who came from where we came from. Then my mother got sick. Stage 3 breast cancer. No insurance worth a damn. I dropped out at the end of my junior year. The scholarship didn't care about sob stories. The law school applications I'd started filling out gathered dust in a drawer. Instead, I found work through an agency that placed domestic staff in high-end Manhattan residences. That's how I met Alexander Thornwood. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Tribeca that probably cost more than my entire neighborhood. 30-foot ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. Art that I'd only seen in museums. A wine cellar that could have been a down payment on a house. He was kind to me from the beginning, which surprised me. Rich people in my experience fell into 2 categories: those who treated you like furniture and those who treated you like a performing seal, overly friendly in a way that made it clear they were performing their own tolerance and magnanimity. Alexander was different. He learned my name immediately. He asked about my family. When he found out I'd gone to Columbia, his eyes lit up. "What were you studying?" "Political science and economics." I was pre-law. "Was?" I told him about my mother. He listened, really listened, with the kind of attention most people reserved for their stock portfolios. "I'm sorry," he'd said. And the thing was, I believed him. Over the next 3 years, a strange relationship developed. I cleaned his home, yes, but we also talked. About law, about business, about the systems that kept people like me out and people like him in. He told me about his company, ThornNet Solutions, and how he'd built it from nothing into one of the most successful cybersecurity firms in the country. "The secret," he'd said once while I was polishing the endless expanse of his marble kitchen island, "is that I actually understand the technology. Most CEOs in my space don't. They rely on their CTOs, their engineers, their analysts. But I built the core algorithms myself. You can't bullshit something when you understand how it works from the ground up." I thought about that a lot. You can't bullshit something when you understand how it works from the ground up. He also noticed things. When I started bringing books to read on my breaks, legal textbooks I'd kept from Columbia, he didn't comment directly. Instead, he started leaving books out for me. Case law, corporate governance, securities regulation. "Those were in my library," he'd say casually. "Feel free to borrow them if you're interested." I was interested, desperately. The dream of law school might have died, but the hunger for legal knowledge hadn't. 3 days before I found myself in that courtroom, everything changed. I arrived for my usual Tuesday shift at 8 a.m. I had my key, my supplies, my routine. But when I opened the door, I knew immediately something was wrong. Alexander was sitting in his living room, not at his desk in his office where he usually worked, but on the white leather couch staring out at the river. He hadn't shaved. His shirt was wrinkled. There was a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, which was shocking because I'd never seen him drink anything harder than wine with dinner. "Mr. Thornwood," I set down my supplies. "Are you all right?" He looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. "Maya, I'm sorry. I should have called. You don't need to work today." "What's wrong?" He laughed, but it was hollow. "What's wrong? Everything. Everything is wrong," he told me then. about how Nexus Capital Management, one of his largest investors, was accusing him of embezzlement. $50 million allegedly siphoned through fake vendor contracts and shell companies. About how the board had voted to suspend him as CEO. About how the news had leaked and Thornet's stock had plummeted 30% in 2 days. "But it's not true," he said, his voice raw. "Maya, I didn't do this. Someone set me up. Someone inside my own company." "What do your lawyers say?" His expression darkened. "Whitfield and Kane dropped me yesterday. Conflict of interest, they said. Nexus is also their client. Couldn't represent both parties." He picked up a letter from the table. "And this morning I got this. Criminal charges being filed. Court date in 3 days. Every other firm I've called won't touch it. Either they also have conflicts, or they think I'm guilty, or they don't want the publicity headache." I stood there processing. "So you have no representation for a criminal trial?" "I have no representation. I have no company. I have—" He gestured around at the penthouse. "All of this, which will be seized if I'm convicted. And I have the absolute certainty that I'm being destroyed by someone I trusted. I should have been thinking about myself, about how, if Alexander went to prison, I'd be out of a job, about my mother's ongoing treatment, my brother's college funds, my own survival. Instead, I was thinking about justice, about systems that protected the guilty and crushed the innocent, about how money could buy you everything except the truth when the sharks smelled blood." "Let me see the case files," I heard myself say. Alexander looked up, confused. "What?" "You said you have all the evidence, all the accusations. Let me see them." "Maya, this isn't—" "I studied corporate law for 3 years at Columbia. I've read every book you've left for me. I understand financial fraud, corporate governance, securities regulation. And I know you didn't do this. That's not how the legal system works. You can't just—" "Then explain to me how it does work," I interrupted. "Explain to me how innocent people go to prison because they can't afford good lawyers. Explain to me how the same system that's supposed to protect everyone somehow always protects the rich and powerful. Explain—" I stopped. I was ranting. But when I looked at Alexander, I saw something shift in his expression. "You really want to see the files? I want to help." He studied me for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to his office. When he returned, he was carrying 3 thick folders. "This is everything," he said. "The accusations, the transaction records they claim are fraudulent, the witness statements from people in my company who supposedly saw me setting this up. It's damning, Maya. It's incredibly damning." I took the folders. They were heavy, but not as heavy as the weight of what I was about to attempt. If you've ever stood up for something you believed in against impossible odds, type yes in the comments. "I'll read everything tonight," I said. "Tomorrow, we start building your defense." "Maya, even if you understand the case, you can't represent me in court. You're not a lawyer." "No," I agreed, "but you can represent yourself, and I can help you. That's legal." For the first time in what was clearly days, Alexander Thornwood smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and fragile, but it was there. "You're remarkable, you know that?" I thought about my mother, still fighting, about my grandmother who'd cleaned houses for 50 years with dignity and grace, about my brothers who were counting on me. "I learned from strong women," I said. "Now let's figure out who's trying to destroy you." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. In my cramped studio apartment in Queens, surrounded by legal textbooks and case files spread across every available surface, I dove into the evidence like an archaeologist excavating ancient ruins. Each document was a fragment, each transaction record a piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. The accusations were detailed and damning. Between March 2022 and October 2024, Alexander had allegedly created 5 shell companies with names similar to legitimate Thornet vendors. Through these companies, he'd processed $50 million in fake invoices, approving payments to himself through a complex network of bank accounts. The evidence seemed airtight. Bank records showing the shell companies receiving payments. Email approvals from Alexander's account, authorizing the transactions. Testimony from 3 executives who claimed they'd questioned the vendors and been told by Alexander to approve them anyway. Digital signatures matching Alexander's on all the fraudulent contracts. But I'd learned something important from 3 years of watching Alexander work. He was meticulous, almost obsessively so. He documented everything, kept backups of backups, created paper trails that would impress a forensic accountant. If Alexander had embezzled $50 million, there would be more evidence. Lots more. If he hadn't, if someone was framing him, then the evidence would be good, but not perfect. There would be gaps, inconsistencies, digital breadcrumbs that didn't quite match. I started with the emails. Modern corporate email systems track everything, not just the message content, but metadata, timestamps, IP addresses, device identifiers, even GPS coordinates if the email was sent from a mobile device. I pulled up the first fraudulent email approval, dated March 15, 2022, at 2:47 p.m. According to the timestamp, Alexander had sent it from his office computer at ThornNet headquarters. Then I cross-referenced it with Alexander's calendar for that day, which he'd provided. March 15, 2022. Alexander had been in San Francisco that entire week for a cybersecurity conference. I pulled up the conference records online. Sure enough, there he was in a photo from a panel discussion, time-stamped at 2:30 p.m. Pacific Time. That was 5:30 p.m. Eastern. The email was sent at 2:47 p.m. Eastern when Alexander was on stage 3,000 miles away. My heart started racing. This was it. This was the crack in the facade. I went through the next email. April 27th, 2022, 4:15 p.m. Alexander's calendar showed he was at a board meeting with Nexus Capital that afternoon. A meeting that ran from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., according to the official minutes I found in the files. The meeting was at Nexus's offices in Midtown. Alexander's email had been sent from his office computer downtown. The GPS metadata confirmed it. Someone had remote access to Alexander's email account. Someone was sending emails in his name from his office when he wasn't there. This is where the truth starts to emerge. If you're invested in seeing justice served, share this video right now. I worked through the night, documenting every inconsistency. By dawn, I had something even more valuable, a pattern. All of the fraudulent emails had been sent on days when Alexander was either out of town or in long meetings. All of them came from his office computer, never from his laptop or phone, which was unusual because Alexander worked from multiple devices constantly. And all of them were sent between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern, a window that corresponded exactly to when Alexander's executive assistant, Marion Foster, would have had access to his office while he was away. Marion Foster, the woman who'd worked for Alexander for 8 years, who had his complete trust, who had administrative access to all his systems, who had recently accepted a position at Nexus Capital Management starting after this case concluded. I grabbed my phone and called Alexander. It was 6 a.m. Maya? His voice was groggy. What? Marion Foster, I said. When did she tell you she was taking the job at Nexus? A pause. 2 months ago. Why? And when did Nexus first raise concerns about the transactions? Another pause. Longer this time. 3 months ago. They hired an external auditor to review our books after some irregularities appeared in our quarterly reports. Irregularities that Marion would have been responsible for reporting in her capacity as your assistant? I could hear Alexander sitting up in bed. You're saying Marion planted this evidence? I'm saying someone with administrative access to your system sent these emails while you were elsewhere. Someone who knew your schedule intimately. Someone who stood to benefit from your downfall. But Marion, we've worked together for 8 years. She's been loyal, dedicated, until Nexus made her a better offer. Mr. Thornwood, I need you to help me access your company's IT logs. We need to see who accessed your computer remotely during the times these emails were sent. The IT department won't cooperate. The board has suspended my access to most systems. Then we need to find someone in IT who will help us off the books. Someone who values truth over corporate politics. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then, I might know someone. David Chen, our senior systems administrator. He's been with the company since the beginning. If anyone would help, it's him. Can you reach out to him today? I can try, but Maya, even if we prove the emails were sent remotely, Carver will argue I could have accessed my own systems remotely. We need more than this. He was right. We needed not just to prove the emails were suspicious, but to definitively link them to Marion. The shell companies, I said. Who set them up? There must be incorporation paperwork, bank account applications, tax ID numbers. That's a paper trail. The prosecution claims I set them up using fake documents and offshore service providers. Very difficult to trace. But not impossible. Give me the names of the shell companies. I'll start tracing them. As Alexander rattled off the names, ThornTech Solutions, LLC, SecureNet Vendors, Inc., CyberSafe Consulting Group, Data Shield Services, LLC, and TechGuard Systems, Inc. I wrote them down, already planning my next moves. This was what I'd trained for at Columbia, what all those late nights studying corporate law had prepared me for. I might not have a law degree, but I knew how to investigate. I knew how to follow money. I knew how to find truth buried under layers of deception. Maya, Alexander said, his voice serious. If you dig too deep, if you start making waves, Nexus is powerful. They have connections everywhere. This could become dangerous. I thought about my mother, who'd faced cancer with courage I could barely comprehend. About my grandmother, who'd faced discrimination and hardship with unbreakable dignity. I'm not afraid of powerful men, I said. I was raised by powerful women. By noon, I'd made contact with David Chen. We met at a coffee shop in Queens, far from the Manhattan offices where corporate surveillance might be watching. David was in his 40s, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time with computers than people. But his eyes were sharp, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm. Alexander told me what you're trying to do, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. He also said, you're not actually a lawyer. No, I admitted. But I understand systems, and someone hacked Alexander's system to frame him. If you're asking me to illegally access company servers, I'm asking you to help an innocent man by reviewing logs that should be part of the discovery process anyway. The prosecution should have provided this data. If they didn't, that's on them. David considered this. You know they offered me a retention bonus to stay on after the transition? Double my current salary. My heart sank. Of course they had. Of course they'd bought everyone's silence. I told them no, David continued. Alexander built this company on principle. He's always treated people fairly, paid well, promoted based on merit. When my daughter got sick 2 years ago, he personally made sure our insurance covered every treatment, even the experimental ones. He didn't have to do that. But he did. Relief flooded through me. So you'll help? I'll help. But I need to do this carefully. If they catch me accessing these logs without authorization, I'll be fired and possibly prosecuted. Then we need to be smart about it. David pulled out his laptop. I've already been smart. I made copies of the relevant logs before I lost admin access. Technically, that's still within my purview as a systems administrator. Maintaining backups is part of my job description. He turned the screen toward me. Lines of code and access logs filled the display, looking like digital hieroglyphics to the uninitiated. But I'd spent enough time around tech to understand the basics. These are the remote access logs for Alexander's office computer during the relevant time periods, David explained. And look at this. He highlighted several entries. Every single time one of those fraudulent emails was sent, someone accessed his machine using a specific VPN tunnel that routes through our executive administration network. Can you trace who used that VPN tunnel? Even better, I can tell you exactly which device connected. He clicked through several screens. Device ID E7742, registered to Marion Foster. And before you ask, yes, I can prove it's her device through MAC address registration and historical access patterns. I struggled to contain my excitement. That's everything. That proves she sent the emails, not Alexander. It proves someone using her device sent them. A good lawyer could argue her device was compromised, that someone else used it. But Marion isn't just anyone. She's the one who's now working for Nexus. The timing is too convenient. David nodded. There's more. I pulled Marion's email records too. The ones from her personal account that she accessed through our network. I shouldn't have that access, but he shrugged. System administrators see everything. And 3 months before the fraud was discovered, Marion had multiple email exchanges with someone at Nexus. The content is encrypted, but the metadata shows extensive communication. Then, 2 weeks before Nexus filed their complaint, Marion received a wire transfer for $50,000 from an offshore account. She deposited it the same day she gave Alexander her resignation notice. Can you prove the wire came from Nexus? Not directly, but I can prove the offshore account was set up the same day as the shell companies. Same IP address for the registration. Same service provider. I sat back, my mind racing. This wasn't just fraud, it was conspiracy. Nexus had paid Marion to frame Alexander, probably so they could seize control of ThornNet at a fraction of its value. With Alexander out of the picture and facing criminal charges, the company would be vulnerable to a hostile takeover. David, I need you to testify to all of this in court. His face paled. Maya, I could lose everything. My job, my reputation. An innocent man could lose his freedom, his entire life's work. And the people who did this will get away with it. David looked at his coffee, his jaw working. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but you need to understand something. Nexus has some of the best lawyers in the country. They'll tear apart every piece of evidence, question every assumption. You'll need more than digital logs. You'll need to prove motive, opportunity, and a clear link between Marion and Nexus's leadership. Then that's what I'll find. If you think David is doing the right thing by risking his career for the truth, comment hero below. Over the next 2 days, I barely slept. I traced the shell companies through incorporation records in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. I found the service provider who'd set them up, a company called Infinite Solutions LLC that specialized in creating anonymous corporate structures. When I called them, claiming to be a paralegal working on the case, they wouldn't provide information. Attorney-client privilege, the board representative said. But attorney-client privilege didn't apply if the service was used to commit fraud. And it didn't prevent me from finding other ways to get information. I researched Infinite Solutions. They had 14 employees. I found their LinkedIn profiles, their social media accounts, their digital footprints. One of them, a 24-year-old junior associate named Marcus Reed, had posted several photos from a recent vacation to Turks and Caicos, staying at a resort that cost $2,000 a night. Interesting, for someone whose LinkedIn profile listed his salary range as $35,000 to $50,000 a year. I created a fake LinkedIn profile and messaged him, posing as a recruiter for a high-end corporate services firm. Would he be interested in discussing new opportunities? He responded within an hour. We scheduled a call. I know what you're thinking. This was ethically questionable, possibly illegal. And you're right. But I'd learned something important from 3 years of watching the rich and powerful operate. They bent the rules constantly. They hired private investigators. They exploited loopholes. They used every advantage money could buy. Well, I couldn't buy investigators, but I was smart, resourceful, and deeply motivated. That would have to be enough. On the phone, I played the part of a headhunter perfectly. I'd studied enough corporate recruiting tactics to sound convincing. After 10 minutes of small talk about his experience at Infinite Solutions, I casually mentioned that we were looking for someone with experience in complex offshore structuring. Oh yeah, I've done plenty of that, Marcus said eagerly. Just last year, I handled a whole package of shell companies for this tech executive. 5 companies, all clean, all registered in different states. Paid us $30,000 for the full setup. That's impressive. What kind of tech company? Something to do with cybersecurity. The client wanted everything anonymous, routed through offshore accounts. We used the whole package: nominee directors, registered agents, encrypted communications. It was a rush job, too. They needed everything set up in like 2 weeks. Who was the client? We might know them. I can't really say, confidentiality and all that, but he lowered his voice conspiratorially. Let's just say it wasn't the executive who ended up with his name on the companies. His assistant handled everything. Real professional woman, knew exactly what she wanted. My pulse quickened. His assistant set up companies in his name without his knowledge? I mean, she had authorization documents and everything. All looked legit. We don't really question that stuff if the paperwork is in order. She paid in wire transfer. Everything was clean. This assistant, was she from Nexus Capital by any chance? There was a pause. How did you... Wait, who did you say you were calling from again? I'd pushed too hard. You know what, Marcus? I think I have all the information I need. We'll be in touch about potential opportunities. I hung up before he could press further. It wasn't a smoking gun. Marcus's testimony would be challenged, and his willingness to bend confidentiality suggested he wasn't the most reliable witness. But it was another piece of the puzzle. Marion had set up the shell companies. She'd paid cash, or rather, someone had paid her to do it. Now I just needed to prove Nexus was behind it all. Which brings us back to that courtroom 3 days later. After Judge Brennan allowed me to proceed as Alexander's assistant, Mitchell Carver launched into his opening statement. He was good. I had to admit that. He painted a picture of Alexander as a brilliant but corrupt executive who'd used his technical knowledge and administrative control to systematically loot his own company. Ladies and gentlemen, Carver said, pacing before the jury box, this case is about greed. Pure, simple greed. Mr. Thornwood had everything. Wealth, success, reputation. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more, and he didn't care who he hurt to get it. He displayed the bank records on a large screen. $50 million, flowing through the shell companies over 2 years. It looked damning. The evidence will show that Mr. Thornwood created these companies himself, authorized payments to them himself, and pocketed the money himself. And when he got caught, he blamed everyone but himself. His loyal assistant of 8 years, the auditors who discovered the fraud, even Nexus Capital, the very investors who funded his success. Carver turned to face Alexander directly. The evidence doesn't lie, Mr. Thornwood, and neither will this jury. When he sat down, the courtroom was silent. I could feel the weight of expectation, the assumption that this case was already over. Judge Brennan turned to me. Ms. Jenkins, does the defense wish to make an opening statement? I stood, feeling every eye in the room on me. The borrowed suit suddenly felt like a costume. My hands wanted to shake, but I forced them to be still. Your Honor, if I may have a moment to confer with my client? Briefly, I leaned down to Alexander. Trust me, I whispered. He nodded. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the defense reserves its opening statement until the start of our case. We'd like to hear the prosecution's evidence first. This was a tactical decision. I didn't want to show our hand until I'd heard exactly what Carver planned to present. More importantly, I needed time to set up what came next. Judge Brennan nodded. Very well. Mr. Carver, call your first witness. The prosecution calls Marion Foster. My heart jumped. Perfect. They were leading with their star witness. Marion walked to the stand with confident grace. She was in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a trustworthy, competent executive assistant who'd been betrayed by her employer. After she was sworn in, Carver approached with the warmth of a mentor. Ms. Foster, how long did you work for Mr. Thornwood? 8 years, Marion said, her voice steady. I was his executive assistant from 2016 until last month. And during that time, would you say you had a good working relationship? Yes. I respected Mr. Thornwood greatly. He was brilliant, demanding, but fair. Can you describe your responsibilities? I managed his calendar, his communications, his travel arrangements. I also handled various administrative functions related to vendor management and payment processing. Did there come a time when you noticed irregularities in the company's vendor payments? Marion's expression shifted to something that looked like regret. Yes. About 8 months ago, I noticed several invoices from vendors I didn't recognize. When I questioned Mr. Thornwood about them, he told me they were legitimate and not to worry about it. Did you believe him? At first, yes. I had no reason not to. But as more invoices came through, I became suspicious. The amounts were large, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the services described were vague. What did you do? I brought my concerns to the CFO, Gerald Hartwell. He investigated and discovered that the vendors were shell companies. When we confronted Mr. Thornwood, he became angry and told us to stop asking questions. This was the narrative they were building. Marion as the whistleblower, Alexander as the guilty party trying to silence her. Carver continued for another 20 minutes, walking Marion through the evidence. The emails, the invoices, the payments. She answered every question perfectly, her voice never wavering. When Carver finally said, "No further questions," Judge Brennan turned to me. "Does the defense wish to cross-examine?" This was it, my first real test. I stood, picking up a folder I'd prepared. "Yes, Your Honor." I approached Marion Foster, watching her expression carefully. She looked at me with something between pity and contempt. The same look I'd seen so many times from wealthy employers who viewed domestic staff as invisible. "Ms. Foster," I began, "you testified that you worked closely with Mr. Thornwood for 8 years, correct?" "That's correct." "And you had administrative access to his computer systems, his email accounts, and his calendar?" "Yes, that was necessary for my job." "You also testified that you brought concerns about these vendors to the CFO 8 months ago?" "Yes." "But the fraudulent transactions allegedly began over 2 years ago, in March 2022. Why did it take you a year and a half to notice?" Marion blinked. The earlier transactions were smaller. They didn't raise red flags initially." "I see. Ms. Foster, do you recognize this document?" I handed her a printout. "This is a VPN access log from Thornet's Executive Administration Network. Can you explain what a VPN is?" "A virtual private